Good afternoon or good day to wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this month's edition of the TogetheRide In Conversation series. I'm your host, Russell Roybal, Chief Advancement Officer at San Francisco AIDS Foundation. And I want to welcome you to this TogetheRide In Conversation, HIV and its impact on transgender women. Before I introduce my guest today, I want to just go over a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. If you need closed captioning, you can scan the QR code on the screen with your phone for access. And if you have questions, like at each TogetheRide In Conversation, please, and you're watching on Twitch or on Facebook Live, please put your questions in the chat and we will try to get to your questions at the end of our conversation today. And so now it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest today on In Conversation. I want to welcome Coach Blossom C. Brown. Welcome, Blossom. Blossom is an actress, producer, activist, spiritual life coach, and professional tarot reader. We're going to have to talk more about that. Originally from the birthplace of blues in Mississippi, she got her degree in public health education, where she became the first Black trans woman to do so. She got worldwide attention for her appearance in season 1 of Caitlyn Jenner's docuseries, I Am Kate, and for her appearance on The Ellen Show. She's been working at the Los Angeles LGBT Center for almost 5 years as a PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, retention navigator, making sure that our LGBTQIA community is able to be educated about PrEP and be able to access care. So welcome, Blossom.
Hi, Russell.
How are you?
Hi, Russell. So good to see you.
Good to see you too. I love your shirt. Stay loud. I think that's good advice for everybody.
Yes.
So welcome, Blossom. I'm so excited for our conversation today about HIV and its impact on transgender women, especially in this Women's History Month. So I think it's important for us to talk about it. And this is a great conversation for everyone out there who is a TogetheRide participant or considering joining TogetheRide to get more information about this topic. So let's start today, though, about how you came to this work, Blossom. I read a little bit about you in your bio, but I would love for you to tell me and tell all of us more about you and your work at the Los Angeles LGBT Center.
Absolutely. So believe it or not, I actually got here through by way of entertainment, actually. I had been on Ellen. I had been on I Am Kate. A lot of my struggle came from wanting to get in nursing school back home in Mississippi, but because I had transitioned in college, that became a barrier and that became a whole big thing. But healthcare was always something that I wanted to do. I got a degree in public health education. I was the very first Black trans woman to get my degree at the university where I was. And ultimately, it really did lead me here to the Los Angeles LGBT Center. And I've been in my same position for 5 years now. And it's very fulfilling to do PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, to be able to see our community get access to that, get educated on that, know that it is for them if they want it. And, just being able to empower people with their sexual health has truly, truly been just amazing for me. And, I've definitely learned a lot. I've learned how to navigate, and I just love, I love my job. I really, really do. And I'm so grateful that I get to be put in a position where I can help people in that way.
That's great. I mean, I feel the same way about my role at San Francisco AIDS Foundation. I just feel like it's a calling, right? Like there's so much passion I have for the work, and I can tell based upon just the little conversation that we've had previous to this, and then today that you really have that passion too, which calls you to do this work and to serve our communities, right? Because who else but us to be able to do this work and make sure that folks like us have access to the services and the care that they need. I want to talk a little bit about the factors in healthcare and in the larger world. And you mentioned a little bit about this in your introduction about yourself, about the barriers that trans women face that lead to the disproportionate impact of HIV on trans women, and in particular, trans women of color. So can you talk to us a little bit about what some of those factors are?
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about healthcare, we have to really think about racial inequality within healthcare. And I do think that sometimes that does go amiss. We really have to look at the racism, the sexism, the transphobia, the misogyny, all of those different isms that do take place within the healthcare system. And truth be told, just thinking about and the way I like to do it is I like to peel back the layers a little bit. I think intersectionality is a very, very important conversation when we're talking about trans women in the healthcare system. And because I live my life as a Black trans woman, I'll speak more about the Black trans experience on this. And you have to remember that in the healthcare system, when it comes to Black people navigating the healthcare system, there's a lot of mistrust. Obviously, we saw with the Tuskegee experiment that is carried on karmically, generationally for Black people for so long, and that does include the Black trans community as well too. And really navigating the healthcare system is all about safe havens, finding true safe havens where we can feel comfortable to go in, be ourselves, be able to talk about our bodies in such a safe way where doctors and healthcare professionals who are willing to take this vow into this work to help other people can feel comfortable to go into. And so I do think we have a lot of work to do being able to navigate that. I will say living here in California compared to Mississippi, it is a lot better. And I personally feel a lot safer because back home in more conservative places, there are not a lot of resources when it comes to trans women being able to navigate the healthcare system very safely compared to California, which is much more progressed, which is much more implementing more trans friendly or trans, let's see, what's a good word? Well, basically, mostly trans friendly like services, I should say. Trans competent is a better word I was thinking about. So, I do think we just have a lot of work to do, and building that trust between trans women in the healthcare system, it really does take a lot, and it takes a lot of effort. When we see the effort that is going on, that is when we are willing to respond and come up to the forefront to be able to make that effort worthwhile and uplift that effort. But I will say it's kind of hit or miss sometimes, so it just really depends. But yeah.
I think that I think you hit on something that we actually talked about in our last conversation last month, because we talked about racism in the healthcare system. But on top of that, there is, I think, for in particular queer and trans people, and in particular queer and trans people of color who have this, like what you mentioned, the distrust of the medical system, and we're seeing that in COVID and the vaccine, right? But that one of the things that we talked about last time too is that for queer and trans people, the coming out process stops, and in our most intimate relationships, including with healthcare providers, we have to do that every time we come into contact with a new provider. And so, and I think for a lot of folks who don't have that lived experience, right, it's not, they don't ever think about having to kind of disclose those kinds of things to their healthcare professional. And you live in Los Angeles, I live in San Francisco, and I think we have access to services that are competent for the communities that we come from. But there are so many folks across the country who don't have access to that, and which is one of the things that in our communities that TogetheRide and the money that's raised at TogetheRide supports is access to quality, competent care for queer and trans people. In a lot of cases, is free of charge at both of our agencies. So one of the things you talked about around the work that you do every day is around PrEP. And I know PrEP for me personally was a transformative experience when I started on PrEP, because for the first time, I felt like every intimate experience I had was not going to result in my death, which is what I thought before, because
Yes.
of all of that messaging that I had gotten around prevention education. Growing up in the height of the AIDS pandemic, and so I want to just give you a moment to really talk about PrEP, the uptake that the work, the incredible work that you're doing in the community to make sure that folks, in particular trans folks and trans folks of color, have access to PrEP.
Mhm.
But what are some of the barriers that you're experiencing in getting community members to, one, know about PrEP, and two,
Yeah.
actively pursue PrEP?
Yeah. So, whenever I discuss PrEP, I always challenge people to look at it from two different sides. Okay. Uh, Sorry. Sorry.
No,
Whenever I
no,
talk about
no worries.
PrEP,
We're live, Blossom, so no worries. That happens sometimes.
oh my gosh, it finally happened to me on live something. Hold on, y'all. Y'all, please forgive
You're
me.
doing great.
I knew one day it was going to happen. Okay, y'all. I think I'm okay. So, whenever I talk about PrEP, because I'm doing this Libra thing again, I always try to look at it from two different sides. Okay, we have to remember that PrEP itself is a choice compared to someone who is HIV positive or living with HIV, excuse me, who is also taking medication where they don't have necessarily a choice. And so when we talk about PrEP, we have to really meet people where they are, how they're comfortable, how they're feeling. I do think on one side of PrEP, because certain people fit into certain groups, sometimes we stigmatize them into wanting to get on PrEP when they may not be ready. And so we have to also be cautious and be very careful when it comes to the stigma of PrEP. Because in some incidents, people would like to say, "Oh, you're a Truvada whore," and all of these other words and stuff that can be offensive. But if you learn how to flip it and turn it into power, and this is the other side of what I was saying, then this is where we begin to meet people where they are. This is where we begin to make people feel empowered. And part of my job is really educating people on it first. Education is super, super important because a lot of people do not know and understand that PrEP is right for them. They don't understand that they can feel empowered sexually and it be a beautiful, positive thing. I think we shame sometimes in communities where, because of certain standards of the way we grow up culturally have stopped us. And we really have to begin to break down those barriers. I think when it comes to trans women in general, I do think that the work when it comes to PrEP has definitely gone a long way. I do still think that we have a lot of work to do. I think that when it comes to outreach, we can also do a better job at targeting specific groups of trans women, particularly Black trans women, because 1 in 4 Black trans women are living with HIV and may not even know it. So, what does access looks like to them? What does access look like to the trans women who are doing sex work? Are we reaching out to them in such a positive, empowering way where we can have that discussion on PrEP? And so, stigma is a big thing when it comes to just PrEP in general. Because again, just because you're a Black or brown person and you're very sexually active, all of a sudden you're put into this place where, oh, I got to get PrEP because I fit this particular category. And we just got to be very careful about that. Very, very careful because we don't want to push somebody on PrEP just because they fit a demographic that we're trying to target, but because we want to
Mhm.
empower them, but because we want to make sure that they are getting the best that they deserve to have. And something like PrEP, it's a game changer. And I love the advances of PrEP. I love being able to educate and school people on it and being able to just get people the access that they need. People need to know that there are other resources for when you're uninsured that you can still get it, or when you're insured, you can still get it. You can be undocumented and you can still get it. Like, people still need to understand that you do have access to PrEP. PrEP itself is a choice. And I always again just try not to force it on anybody. I always want to give them the options flat out, straight out, and let people choose on their own, because having the power to choose is such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And when people choose PrEP, when my clients choose PrEP, I get very excited because I'm meeting them where they are. I'm empowering their sex life. I want them to feel empowered about their sex life, and that they could really just soar to the sky.
That's very inspiring, Blossom. I can understand why you're a life coach. Coach Blossom is with us today, giving you some words of wisdom
Thank you,
here
Russell.
on to the Together Right in Conversation. But I think what you're saying is really
Mhm,
key because it's about, I think for a lot of folks in our community, they feel like they don't have choices. And
mhm.
when folks have that education and have that information and can make choices about their own lives, it is completely empowering. And so thanks for doing that work in the community. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you're doing in your role? Like what are you doing out in the community in LA to achieve that goal?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I've really started implementing more prep conversations on my platform. Just recently, actually, I did a video with Shan Boutram. So long story short, on Instagram, she had did a response video to Justin, who is the king of Reeds, and he was talking about the conversation. So basically, he's a black gay man in Atlanta, who was discussing disclosure in HIV, but he was talking through the lens of being undetectable, which, and in conversation now, the CDC has now said that if you're taking your medication every single day and if you're completely undetectable, that the chance of you passing the HIV on to someone else is pretty much 0%. And so that's very crucial information that a lot of people still don't know. And so what ended up happening was there was just this conversation and opportunity where Shan needed a little bit more education on what was really going on. And so what I ended up doing was in the comments section, actually challenging her to have a conversation with a black trans woman about HIV. I challenged her and Jared, who is also her husband. And so to be able to do that. And what ended up happening next was truly, truly amazing because she did reach out to me. She did accept my challenge. And we did a video together talking about PrEP, HIV, when it comes to trans women. She also talked with another physician, getting more information on what undetectable looks like, and just kind of furthering that conversation about disclosure. And so for me to be able to do that and really have that conversation with someone who may not be having everyday conversations with black trans women, it's the start of something. You know what I mean? Like, this is what we have to do. We have to build the foundation first of conversation. Sometimes you have to put out a call to action like I did. Sometimes you have to challenge people on their thinking to expand their mindset when it comes to these particular issues. You have to do it respectfully and unapologetically. And once you do that, you will really find that you will attract more opportunities for those conversations to be had. So that's just like one of the things I'm doing. Obviously, working here at the center has been a great thing for the community that I serve because at the same time, I'm also a part of that community. I also live in that community. I also navigate through that community. And so for me, being able to give back in that particular way is truly, truly a blessing. And right now, I'm still trying to figure out other avenues of how to do that because, you know, I come to work and I do my thing, yes, but then I have another life outside of work. And to be able to implement some of the things that I've learned at work into that platform to expand it is truly something I feel grateful and fortunate to do. But I definitely want to expand more on that. And so as I continue to expand my brand and my platform, we would definitely be able to have more of these conversations when it comes to PrEP. And I don't want it just to be conversations about trans women. Trans men are also affected. Other groups of people within the trans spectrum also need to have their voices heard when it comes to PrEP. And so hopefully I can at least be a catalyst or maybe just inspiration for someone to kind of jumpstart that conversation and, hopefully see what happens there. So, I'm doing some
Sure.
things and I'm always energetically thinking, what else can I do to help be a part of the solution and not contribute to the problem?
That's great. And I think that's a good lead into our next question, which is, and I want to remind folks if you have a question for Coach Blossom, please feel free to just put the question in the chat on Twitch or Facebook Live, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But what I wanted to ask you is really about the center, and how does the center build trust with the trans community and address negative healthcare encounters that often discourage trans folks from accessing healthcare?
Absolutely. I think the center is doing an amazing job. I think the center is doing the best that they can. We have to continue to have very uncomfortable conversations. We can't heal what we don't reveal. Okay. And so I do think that um, continuous outreach and building that trust between the trans community is something that's truly, truly important that has to be continuous. It has to be consistent. It's not something that we can just start and stop because again, gaining trust especially when it comes to Black trans women, and I speak more on Black trans women because again, this is the experience that I live every single day. Understanding that again, just with Blackness alone, medical mistrust is one thing, but then when dealing with transness, we are dealing with transphobia within the LGBTQ spectrum. We're also dealing with cis privilege, a privilege that I may not have as a trans person, and that some of us as trans people will have to forego our experience to be able to navigate, just to be able to have access to healthcare, access to education, access to housing, and all of these different things. And so we don't really talk about the cis privilege within the LGBTQ community enough. And I do think that at the center, we have to start having these honest conversations if we want to move forward, if we want to thrive, if we want to heal. I do think that the services that the center is providing right now are such a great upstart to that. I know they've been going for years, and I say upstart for a reason because I see growth coming. I see expansion coming. We can't just stop with um, what they would call the bare minimum. And I'm not saying that the services here are the bare minimum. What I'm saying is we need to challenge our expansion just a little bit more and continuously add on top of things, keep building, building, building. And as we continuously build, we begin to add trust. We begin to see the trust. Because a lot of us in the trans community, we're all about action at this point for so many decades. And I give praise to all of the activists that are here in Los Angeles that have been doing the work way longer before I got here. I think they are inspiration. I think that, they're powerful and they're brilliant. And, it's all about really showing them as well as all of us. This is what's really happening at the center. This is where we're trying to move towards. We do have a painful past with the trans community, but we are willing to heal that. We're willing to move forward. We are willing to put a spotlight and really, really listen. Because honestly, when you just take ego out of the situation, and I'm just talking about ego just in general, and just really think about the work that needs to be done without putting your personal hands on it or anything like that, you'll see that we can attack old, unsturdy foundations and structures, tear them down, rewire, reprogram, deprogram, and actually begin to program better things. Program resonance. Take out the dissonance and put in more resonance. This is how we energetically begin to have these conversations and begin to build trust in the trans community, especially in the healthcare system. Again, providing safe spaces where we don't have to worry about transphobia. We don't have to worry about the misogyny. We don't have to be worried about being laughed at when we come into a certain place. Because sometimes some of the harm that does come towards trans people are coming from some of our LGBT brothers, sisters, and siblings as well, too. So it's not always heterosis normativity that we're talking about. We do self-harm within the LGBTQ spectrum. And we have to really begin to start holding some of our very own accountable before we worry about holding other people who don't identify in the LGBTQ community accountable as well. And I also play a part in that as well, too. So we definitely have a lot of work to do. But I just want to give praise for the work that has been done because, being able to have a transgender health program here at the center has been such a safe haven for a lot of trans people here. And I think that's such a great, great thing. And I would love to see an expansion on that too. Keep building. keep thriving. That's just all I just really see. Like we just have to keep going, keep creating new coalitions, I would like to say. And once we create those new coalitions, I think it will get stronger and I think it'll get better.
Thank you for that. One of the reasons why we wanted to have the topic this month around HIV and its impact on trans women is because we know that trans women are disproportionately impacted by HIV.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the center is doing to stop new transmissions and keep people in care? And one of the things I think that you mentioned earlier is sex work. And one of the things that we do at San Francisco AIDS Foundation is we partner with St. James Infirmary and some other organizations to do outreach to the sex worker community. Are you doing that in your work at the center too?
Yes, I think we have an amazing outreach team, both here at the Schrader location and also in South LA that do reach out as well, especially to trans people, and it's so good to see that work. And it's really refreshing that the center has moved and navigated more towards Black and Brown areas where this work can really continue. And so that's really just a good thing to see for the most part. When it comes to me, honestly, Russell, I always like to challenge. Okay. I always like to challenge us to continue to do more. And so, more of the call to action for me is to continue to reach out more to Black trans women who are dealing with HIV, trans women of color who are dealing with HIV. Really bring those voices to the table, even more than what they already are now, and continue to have those discussions. I do see a lot of the great work that is happening. I see some of my colleagues who are out there on the streets doing their thing, being able to connect them to me to be able to get them access to PrEP, and being able to get them access to other things that they may need as well too, like when it comes to hormones and other things like that, because it feels good to be at a place where it feels like a one-stop shop, because that's really important within the trans experience, because again, jumping from one place to the next place to the next place can be very triggering and traumatizing for trans people, especially Black trans women who are dealing with an alarming rate of violence, an alarming rate of killings. And it's just really just something that really does just needs more attention. I think the center again is doing a great job. I think that my colleagues are doing an amazing job with the linkage, especially. The one thing I would always say is I will continue to challenge us to do more, challenge us to continue to have these open discussions, challenge people to bring these voices and bring these experiences to the table so we can at least begin to make a blueprint on how to deal with this. Okay. And when I talk about blueprint, the great thing about a blueprint is it can change at any time because you are the creator of that. Creating a blueprint on really looking at what's really happening in these communities. What are they facing every single day? What's really happening? Okay. How are we protecting them? What can the center do to protect as far as like within the healthcare system? You know what I mean? To make their experience better. Like these are just things that me personally, as just a challenger, I'm always thinking about just challenging us to just continue the expansion. This is not to negate anything, any of the work that's been done, but I'm all about just challenge.
That's great. One of the things that you just mentioned that we're doing at the foundation too is we're doing hormone checks so that folks don't have to make choices about their care, and they can come in as like you said, as a one-stop shop to really get
Absolutely.
access to treat their whole selves, right? Not compartmentalize um, who they are, and that has become that has become particularly more important during this last year with COVID. And I wondered if you could, one of the things that we've talked about in each of the in conversations is the impact that COVID has had on the communities that we serve. And have you seen anything in your work, or what is that? What has it been like the last year to do the kind of work you're doing during the pandemic?
Yeah, I feel so fortunate that I work at a place where things are definitely under control, that we have amazing leadership that is doing their best to make sure that everyone is staying safe. When I think about my trans community, just in general, the community that I am a part of and the community that I serve, it really was devastating. COVID-19 has been so devastating for the trans community because, again, the way that access runs, trans people are usually on the back burner, and trans people are usually at the bottom of the barrel. And so what we really have to start doing is, for more of these trans-led organizations, we have to make sure that that we are supplying the demand, that we are also bringing them to the table as well. And I do think that the center does an amazing job doing that, for sure. I always think more about those trans-led organizations because they're the ones not only living the experience, but their work is 100% centered around that. And so when you're a trans person and you're trying to get services, you're only going to go to places where it's either trans led or it's trans competent and trans friendly. Okay, that's like your safe haven. And the thing is, though, I'm so grateful that the center is in a place where we're able to take care of our trans clients and be able to shelter them, be able to get them what they need. But I also think about those trans led organizations who don't have necessarily the power as some of these large organizations do. And I use my time and I use my energy to also speak light into them as well too, because even though they may not have the massive um community that we have here, they're still important as well too. And so, I believe in sharing the book across the whole genre. I believe in really spreading the love across everywhere, because at the end of the day, we're all in this together, and COVID-19 has been so devastating for all of us. This is the one thing that can bring us all together. The way this pandemic has really just taken so many lives, it's taken so many jobs, it's taken so many spirits, so much hope and everything. And so, it's just always about just being mindful of those who are just suffering just a little bit more than you. And I uphold, excuse me, I amplify my community more during that, because seeing some of my undocumented trans siblings being denied healthcare access, being denied sometimes vaccines or whatever, in particular areas, because I've definitely heard about it on the news and I've heard about it around community. It's very disheartening and it's very heartbreaking because they don't deserve that. My community does not deserve that. But unfortunately, we've always gotten the short end of the stick. And so that's where power comes in. That's where empowerment comes in. That's where hope and faith and everything else that is used to really, really keep us going has to really, really come in. And so, um, although COVID-19 has been so devastating, not just for the trans community, but for all of us, I think that we're all resilient. And I also think that we will beat this hands down all together.
I think that the resilience of our communities is incredible, and I think we are witnessing that certainly with COVID-19. We witnessed that throughout the years with AIDS, and I used to work at the National LGBTQ Task Force, and when I was there, we released with the National Center for Transgender Equality the first kind of comprehensive
Love those
trans survey,
organizations. Love them.
and I remember that the data was devastating around the barriers that trans folks face, in particular trans women of color, due to racism, sexism, transphobia, patriarchy. But one of the things from the survey that was so inspiring was the resilience of trans folks, and in particular trans women of color, to really persevere despite all of these barriers, and to really, when they find those safe spaces that you're talking about, to really thrive. And I think that
Yes.
both of our organizations have deep commitments to making that possible. And it's through the support of folks who are watching that do Together Ride or do AIDS Life Cycle that enable us to be able to have the resources to do that. So I think a lot of people are probably asking themselves if they identify as cisgender, like what can they do to support the trans community? And so I just want to ask you, what can cisgender allies do to support and uplift the trans community, particularly those who've been impacted by HIV?
Absolutely. When we talk about allyship, this is where we have to begin to flip allyship and turn it into accompliceship. What do I mean by that? Well, anybody can say they're an ally and their actions not meet their words. But when you are an accomplice, no one ever questions your loyalty or your trust. We know you're always on the front lines. We know that you're willing to lose something, just like we are too. And I think that we start with that first, with just the basis of flipping allyship and turning it more into accompliceship, looking at access and privilege. I'm gonna just break it down, Russell, because this is what I gotta do. If you are white and if you are cis, you have a privilege that most do not have. So let's be very clear. If you have any type of access, if you want to be a true accomplice, amplify Black and Brown Indigenous voices, amplify trans voices, amplify what needs to be heard and what needs to be seen. Donate to trans-led organizations. Donate to organizations who are trans competent, who have trans programs. Donate to these organizations. Donate to these organizations who are centering trans work. Period. And which, again, I'm so glad that the center does this as well too. I'm super, super grateful for that. Really, really take your time and your energy and learn about the trans experience. Learn about the things that we go through. Learn about the things that we lack. Learn about the trauma and all of those things that we have to carry around each and every day. This is not something that we get to take off at night. Every day that we get up and we breathe air, that is liberation for us. Every day that we go out to a job where we may be experiencing transphobia, misogyny, and all of these other things, racism, sexism, that's liberation. And people really just do not understand our struggle. And it's really time that we begin to come together and build these coalitions. Okay. Follow some of these trans activists like myself and so many others that are in this community that are doing the work. So you can have a firsthand experience on seeing what's really going on, what's really happening. What can I do to do better? Okay. I think that's where it can start, at least. And I say start because, again, this work is ongoing. And that's another thing about allyship. Sometimes allies will start, but then they'll stop. And then they'll think it's cute to jump in where they want to. Okay. I'm going to use I statements when I say this. I don't think that's what we need in the trans community. We need accomplices that are there for the ride all the time. They are there for us every step of the way. And I think that's how we begin to build bridges. Okay. Building those bridges and really, really locking arms with each other to understand, hey, no matter what, I got your back. I got your back. And I challenge not even just white cis people to do that. I challenge everyone who doesn't live the trans experience to do that too. And again, this doesn't negate any issues that they may go through. That's not what this is about. This isn't a game of the Depression Olympics. This is a game of solidarity. This is a game of unity. And I think that it's starting there, just starting right there, can truly, truly move us to a place of unity and where we can begin to really, really amplify the trans experience and really, really just be heard, be seen. We went through 4 years of pure HELL under an administration that just wanted to constantly pick at trans people, that wanted to bully trans youth, Grown folks who want to bully children, because trans youth are still children in this world who deserve to live their life comfortably. It's one thing they already have to deal with other children their age that don't understand the experience, but to have grown adults doing it, especially in some of these very conservative states, that's a problem. And so if you have access, if you have privilege, call that mess out. When we leave the room and you hear transphobia, call it out. Because if you don't, you're only upholding the problem. You're only upholding white supremacy. So when you start opening up your mouth, opening up your throat chakra, and saying and holding people accountable that do need to be held accountable, I think that's where we begin to see cisgender accomplices do the work.
I love that. I love instead of referring as an ally to as an accomplice. I think that is I think that's amazing. I love that whole concept.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Thank
yeah, I mean,
you.
I want to be I mean, who doesn't want to be a ride or die accomplice, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's just also important to remember too, Russell, that not everybody is going to get it right away. Everybody makes mistakes. And I do think that grace does have to be afforded, especially when you see
Sure.
someone that's really, really trying. And I always try to remember that in my work. And I also hopefully see other trans people remember that too. But some people just don't want to get it. Let's just be honest. Some do and some don't. And we can always weed out the ones that truly, truly don't. At least I can.
Sure.
And the ones that really, really do want to do the work, we definitely offer grace, an extension of grace somewhat. But within that grace, truly learn. Okay? Don't take that grace for granted.
Yeah. I think that that whole concept of we all could have a little more grace, and
Absolutely.
I think that's the Mississippi in you talking.
Yeah. Yes. I carry it everywhere. I don't. It's just a thing.
No, I think that is an amazing concept. Both of those things that you just talked about, being an accomplice, not just an ally, but like the active. Like to me, being an accomplice is really being an active part, right, of the solution. And then yes, I think we need to be more generous with each other and to have a lot more grace. And so thank you for bringing that to the conversation. You mentioned earlier, and we're going to get to audience questions in a second. But you mentioned earlier when you were talking about something, you were being a Libra. Are you a Libra?
Yes, I am a Libra sun, Gemini moon, and Capricorn rising. For those of y'all that follow astrology like I do, I'm heavy into astrology, numerology, and tarot. So that's kind of like
when's your
thing.
When is your birthday? What day is your birthday?
So it's 10/20, October 20.
Oh, my birthday's October 3rd. I'm also a Libra, so
Okay.
I mean I knew I loved you, and so now that's just a confirmation.
I love it.
We have some questions from folks who are watching. So again, if you have questions, please put them into the chat on Twitch or on Facebook Live. And one of the questions that we have is, this is a great question about the center, which is, what actions has the Los Angeles LGBT Center, this comes from Twitch, what actions has the Los Angeles LGBT Center taken to make the center a safe space for trans employees?
Absolutely. I think that's a great, amazing question for the most part. I do think that they have definitely been trying to amplify trans voices where it is needed. I do truly, like, for example, me doing this today is definitely a big step. I do think that I do think that the center does care about their trans employees. And I do think that more can come of this. I definitely appreciate the center. I've been working here for 5 years, and I'm grateful to be in a department where, as one of the only trans people there, I feel really good to be supported by my colleagues. I feel good to really, really come to work every day and despite what goes on despite what goes on outside of the center in the trans community, as far as like the violence against Black trans women, it feels good to come into a safe space at work where I don't have to worry about that, and I don't have to worry about the transphobia. I do think that the center is definitely taking those action steps to make sure that it's a very safe space for trans people. And so, I definitely give kudos up to the center for doing that. I'm always because actually about a year or two ago, I was wanting to put together something like a kind of like a trans coalition, and I actually did bring the idea up, and they actually approved it. But then COVID hit, so it really never just happened, unfortunately. So that was kind of one of those things that got put on hold. So there was definitely action steps moving forward when it comes to the trans community within the center, as far as like employees. And so yeah, and I enjoy working with my trans colleagues. I love them dearly, and I love the work that they're doing. And I want their voices amplified too. And I know the center will make sure that trans voices within the center are going to be amplified. I have no doubt about that.
That's great to hear. Well, earlier you talked about, wanting to expand services, wanting for there to be more services for trans folks. So a question that has come in on Facebook is, if more funding becomes available, what kind of programs or resources would you like to see in the future to further support our trans community members?
Absolutely. I think, substance abuse is something that really, really does affect the trans community because of those issues, of those isms that I was talking about earlier. A lot of times, to cope, some of our trans brothers, sisters, and siblings have to turn to substance abuse. And I do think that there has to be a separate component when it comes to focusing specifically on that. Or if there is one already, because I'm actually going to take a deeper dive look into this or whatnot, maybe expanding on that too, because I'm sure we do, but I just need to really take more of a look at it and see what we can do to expand it. But do and just really, really just creating programming that really does address trans needs, that really does make them feel valid. Okay. I think that, of course, more outreach. This is really got my mind thinking a little bit too. And I actually love that because I love to think and I love to really figure out things in the mindset. So I think it could just at least start there, just really looking at the issues of what trans people go through and being able to create programming around that and what that does look like. Because what needs to happen, and the reason why I say separate the T out, is because oftentimes the T does get lost within the LGBTQ spectrum, and the T does need more attention than what it does get. And I'm just speaking about the T in general within the LGBTQ spectrum. Because again, when I was talking about cis privilege versus like trans privilege, that's something that we have to address within the LGBTQ spectrum. So I do think that if funding were to become more available, that there will be more trans-centered focus on certain things, like again, substance abuse, mental health, of course, hormone therapy, when it comes to just like housing, employment. And it's so funny because we actually do have a whole like a trans employment program here, which is really, really good actually. And it's such it's been such a positive thing for years. And so even having more support in that, being able to expand that more, you know what I mean? Just continuously supporting the programs that we already have. I think that's the overall message that I'm just trying to get, expanding and supporting what we already have.
One of the things that we talked about was around the previous administration's really assault on the trans community that you mentioned, or really picking on the trans community, including trans children and transgender youth. And so, a question that we have that came in on Facebook is, with the new presidential administration, is there any federal action to protect trans rights that you anticipate coming up? I know part of that is included in the Equality Act, but what role, what do you think needs to happen around protecting trans rights?
Absolutely. I've met Joe Biden before. Like years ago, we did an HRC event together. We were actually speaking at the same time. And after I got done speaking, I actually met him backstage, and he's definitely an amazing person. And actually, Kamala Harris is actually my birthday twin, and I've actually met her before. And so, I think that their leadership is amazing, and what they're doing so far, having to clean up this mess that man left 4 years ago. I do think that patience is key, because again, they're already cleaning up the mess that other administration did. But I would love to see trans people being able to come back into the White House to be able to have these powerful discussions. Once upon a time, when President Obama was president, what happened was all of the trans people from across the country, myself included, we actually went to the White House, and we actually sat down and had a conversation with the CDC about funding when it comes to trans organizations, when it comes to HIV care. Like, we were able to have those discussions. And I do think that in order for better legislation to be passed when it comes to trans rights, it's going to have to happen like that again. You got to have trans people sitting at the table regardless. And it has to be diverse. It has to be Black trans folks. It has to be brown trans folks. It has to be indigenous trans folks. It has to be Asian Pacific trans folks. It has to be our non-binary community, because again, they are also part of the trans spectrum as well too. And then so when you really just have those people who are maybe leading their organizations or representing an organization, I do think that this is where we begin to build better, hopefully legislation, better ways of protecting our community as a whole. And I do think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are probably the ones that can do that. It's one of those things where I have an understanding that you can only do so much in a certain amount of time. But when you see the effort, when you actually can envision and see the effort, that's where I, as an activist, move towards the work. Because as an activist, you only really move more towards where work is needed. And so when I do see that, because I'm already starting to see a little bit of it now, because they're definitely a very diverse administration. And so that's really, really good to see some of my trans siblings that are in like the White House, or that are working within that administration, being able to make sure that trans voices are heard, or it's truly, truly a great thing. Trans leadership is very, very important. And so hopefully we can get back to that where we were over 8 years ago, where we can again to see those conversations start being facilitated and really, really start getting down to the nitty gritty.
Thanks for that, Blossom. One of the last question, and then we're going to have to wrap up for today, is we got a from Ari out watching, wants to know, do you have an Instagram account? And what's your Instagram account?
I do. Also, I have two Instagrams. So at Blossom C Brown is my main page, and Tell All Blossom is my tarot page. Okay. So I do tarot readings every week, like little motivational tarot readings and stuff. So I try to post them up on both. And like my activism stuff is on there. So like it's kind of like a one-stop shop on my IG, kind of, you know what I mean? I post inspirational videos, I post activism stuff, and my tarot readings. And so yeah, definitely follow me, Blossom C Brown, all platforms for sure. But that is definitely my IG. Come say hello. I'm cool like that. Yeah, it's gonna say Coach Blossom C Brown in there. So yeah.
That is so great. And I just want to thank you, Blossom, for the last hour. Like, this has been an amazing conversation, and so great to be able to spend time with you and get to be in conversation with you about this topic. So like amazing. I could do another hour of this, but
right.
So thank you so much for joining us today, and for sharing your smarts and your spirit with all of us, and for encouraging us to be accomplices and to live our lives with grace. Thanks so much, Blossom, for joining us today.
You're so welcome, Russell. Thank you for having me.
Great. And so I just want to do some wrap up announcements. Again, our guest today has been Coach Blossom C. Brown from the Los Angeles LGBT Center. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. I want to congratulate all of us on Together Ride because we passed our first $1 million, but we are still aiming for $5 million by June 30th. And it's not too late to get involved by registering for just $25 at TogetheRide.org. As of next week, we're only 100 days away from the end of the season. And so we have 100 days to get to that $5 million goal. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us next month for the Together Ride Talent Show on April 16th at 6 p.m. Pacific time. I'll be joined by Jessica Fisher. We'll be hosting the talent show together. It's always a raucous time. If you would like to submit something for consideration to the talent show, you can do that also at TogetheRide.org. And then our next In Conversation is scheduled for April 28th at 1 p.m. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Russell Roybal from San Francisco AIDS Foundation. See you at the talent show or at the next Together Ride In Conversation. Have a great day.